Okay, good afternoon. It's Thursday, May 7th, and we are going to kick off our City Council study session. Today is on the South 35th Avenue Corridor Extension Project, and for that, we will turn over to staff, and we have Miranda Lang over here with us today. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. Council, good to see you on this sunny afternoon. Today we have Nicole McDermott here with us from WSP. They have been our consultant that has been doing all of their due diligence and research to provide us all the data that is needed to help determine a locally preferred alternative on the 35th Avenue project. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Miranda. Mayor, Council, thanks for having me. So as Miranda said, we want to go through our preliminary analysis today. Feel free to interrupt me during the presentation too. We have discussion kind of questions at the end, but I'm happy to take questions kind of as I go too on the individual slides. So if we can start with the agenda slide. Next slide. Oh. Perfect. So a little bit of background, not too much. I know you all are familiar with the project, and I was here several months ago talking about the purpose and need as well. Look at the project schedule and where we're at in that schedule. We'll show the purpose and need, the updated purpose and need based on that prior conversation we had, talk about the community engagement we've been doing over the last several months, and then the preliminary traffic and environmental findings and next steps. So overview, again, of the alternatives. So we're looking at the red and the green alternatives. The green is, South 35th Place, extension down to Pioneer. And then the red alternative is a new roadway and then partially aligning with the existing Bertzinger Road as well. Next slide. So this is our project schedule. So what you all saw this before, but we kicked off the project. We had a study session with you all to talk about the purpose and need. We refined that purpose and need, and then we really went into our community engagement process and our preliminary analysis. So we conducted quite a few stakeholder interviews. I'll talk about kind of the details of those previously, or in just a moment. We had community meetings and an open house. And then we dug into the existing data and reports that are available to consolidate everything into one report that shows our preliminary environmental findings. We also did a preliminary traffic study. So that's what's been happening over the last several months. We're now at the stage where we're bringing those findings to you all for discussion. And then from there, we will go to the locally preferred alternative and then enter into the NEPA process. Next slide. So another quick reminder on the NEPA process. Federal funding is anticipated for this project, so that's why we're talking about NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So that will be required if federal funding is part of the project. So we are going ahead and anticipating that it will be, and looking at this process following the NEPA compliance steps. And so that's why it's this process to get to a locally preferred alternative is really important, and it's based on analysis and findings and not just opinions. And so that's important in the NEPA process, that it is there is a reason why the locally preferred alternative was selected, so we can back that up, and then hopefully it will be supported by WSDOT and FHWA as well when we get into the NEPA process. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. For the federal funding, are we anticipating like specific grants, or are we hoping that we get some congressional help on this?
So it will be either direction, whichever funding we can get. Really, where the money flows, we'll take it.
Okay.
And this isn't presupposing that we will get federal funding. It's simply allowing us to proceed at a more expedited fashion if we do get federal funding. And so we've already done the NEPA process, so we become eligible for it. If we don't get it, or we decide we don't want it because we use other funding sources, great. No harm, no foul, but we will have already gone through that process, so we don't have to restart.
And I would imagine that strengthens our application anyway.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Real quick too, just to your point about this is not based on opinion, it's based off of data and looking at hard look at this. we've seen this before, and I think where we started is council was originally presented with like 3 or 4 different route alternatives, and then we, largely by opinion, chose the red and the green route that we're at right now. When you go through that, are you looking only at the red and the green based on what we've chosen, or do you guys go back and say you might have missed something with the other 2 that you didn't pick?
We're not going backwards in this process.
Yeah.
We are starting with the red and the green, and so I think there was some additional analysis that happened in that prior process. That I think it was 5 alternatives. I think
Yeah.
that you were looking at, and so that has been good background as well. But we are not looking at those other alternatives again. We're starting from the place of the red and green being selected, and I think it is defensible that those were the most viable options moving forward.
That's what I was looking for.
And so in our preliminary discussions with FHWA and WashDOT, there hasn't been concern about what other alternatives might exist. The discussion we've had to date is really just about how you get from these 2 to the one that becomes the locally preferred.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Burkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Are we far enough along in the process to know whether or not we're going to have any problems with NEPA?
Well, I guess short answer would maybe be no. I mean, it's hard to know exactly. I think that NEPA can be a complicated process, but it also is fairly formulaic, and we're following the formula that exists, and we're having a lot of coordination meetings with WashDOT and FHWA to try to foresee any potential issues. So we've made some adjustments to the purpose and need in order to address, FHWA comments. They were pretty minor. They thought the purpose and need largely was good as it was. And then I think looking at, again, how you all deliberate and make a selection of the locally preferred alternative will be an important documentation in entering into that NEPA process.
And one thing to remember with NEPA and SEPA, it is not the National Environmental Protection Act. It's the National Environmental Policy Act, the State Environmental Policy Act. These are policy acts with a whole bunch of hoops to go through to get data, to get information to determine mitigation necessary on potential impacts, and really be able to get a better determination of what are the impacts and what are the costs, and positive and negative on all of that, to give you better information and idea for how you want to move forward with a preferred alternative. It really isn't set up as a yes or a no. So when we talk about having issues with NEPA, what we talk about is more time, more cost, more mitigation. Those are the things that you see that become hurdles in an alternative. It's not that the feds are going to say no, because that's not how the act was set up.
Thank you.
Great. I think we're good to move on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the purpose and need. Again, this is what we discussed with you all before, and then we made some adjustments, as I said, based on discussions with WashDOT and FHWA, really just wanting to more specifically think about the transportation network holistically, so it's not a focus on vehicular or pedestrian and bikes, but it's just the transportation network as a whole, and really focus then on community connectivity as well. So there were just some minor word changes in that first kind of statement related to that. So again, the primary pieces here are enhancing connectivity and resilience, improving capacity and safety, balancing long-term land use objectives and potential impacts. And so the purpose and need is important because it sets the stage for the project. It identifies the purpose of the project and why the community needs the project. And that is one of the things that the 2 alternatives are assessed against for you to be able to select what a locally preferred alternative is. Which alternative best meets this purpose and need is one thing for you to consider. Next slide. So community engagement, as I mentioned, we've been having a lot of community conversations, stakeholder conversations over the last few months. We also took into account all of the community engagement that has happened to get us to this point as well. So that started with the sub-area plan process when this roadway extension was first identified as being needed as the area developed. And then there were the neighborhood and public meetings that happened as part of that prior alternatives analysis process where you were looking at the 5 alignments. And then as you narrowed it down to these two, that's where we have taken over, and now we conducted the stakeholder interviews. So instead of it just individual one-on-one interviews, we wanted to reach as many people as possible in that kind of setting as well. So we had some individual interviews with property owners that are going to be potentially the most impacted by one of the alternatives. And then beyond that, we had more of a group interview for the different neighborhoods. So we spoke to around 40 community members through that process. And then we also had a community open house where we invited the entire Ridgefield community to attend, and we had about 30 community members attend that. It still felt like it was primarily the neighbors that were involved, but it was open and advertised more broadly. And then after the in-person open house, we had online engagement too. So we wanted to provide additional opportunity for comment if people were not able to make it to that in-person event. And so we put the materials on Ridgefield Roundtable and had about a 2-week period where we were collecting comments via email, via Facebook comments, and responding to those too.
What kind of response did we get to that?
We got an additional, I don't know, I would say 20-ish or so comments from, and we got probably that many as well, written comments from the in-person open house too, and all of those are in the packet, all the comments we received from the in-person and the online comments as well. We heard kind of the same things reiterated. I don't think anything new probably was necessarily presented through the online, but it did feel like that, we reached more people, and it solidified kind of the things that people are most concerned about.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, which is the next slide, I believe, is what we have primarily heard. So the majority of people who have been involved in the process and who are commenting seem to be in favor of the green alternative. So there is a community preference, at least from the people involved, in favoring that green alternative. And there were concerns noted with the potential environmental and neighborhood impacts and potential additional cost associated with the red alternative. So that seemed to be, if the preference was for the green, those were the things that people were noting kind of as concerns with the red alternative. On the flip side, if support was for the red alternative, because there certainly are community members and people who have been involved in the process that support the red alternative, the interest there is that it provides a more direct connection to Pioneer from more of the western end of the sub-area. And so where you're seeing the development occur at Ridgefield Heights, it's a more direct connection. So it potentially could relieve some of the traffic of people coming, South 10th Way to Royal, that, again, you can just more directly get to Pioneer from that portion of the sub-area. And concern with the individual property owner impacts on the green alternative. There is more individual residential property owner impacts with the green alternative than the red. Regardless of which alignment was preferred, overall there were several kind of objectives and things that we heard consistently, which is this alignment needs to improve connectivity and access for the future growth of the area, the growth that's currently happening in Ridgefield Heights, and then future growth that would be happening through future annexations and development as well. Increasing safety for all users. There was a lot of concern around, as the area is growing, people are already biking and walking on roadways that don't have those facilities, and there are safety concerns, and as the area continues to grow, making sure that people can get around safely in their cars or not. So that kind of both of those bullets there. And then balancing the transportation improvements with the environmental impacts, potential environmental impacts as well. So either of these alternatives have potential environmental impacts. They are going through undeveloped land and needing to really balance those, and how would those things be mitigated in the future. And this process, I'll just say, didn't really look at mitigation yet. That's what the NEPA process will do, is look at what the actual mitigation would be for those potential impacts. And then also incorporating.
1 second,
Yeah,
yes,
sorry.
go ahead,
Go
Mike.
So just speaking to that process in mitigation, so say we choose one and then the mitigation is like, woof, like this is not great. What is the process after that?
Well, I think, good question. I mean, if with either of these, there is going to be mitigation in the form of probably mitigating for potential noise impacts, so there might be sound walls associated with both. There might be wetland impacts where you're having to do on-site or off-site wetland mitigation. So I think from this preliminary assessment, we have a pretty good idea of what the mitigation would be and the types of mitigation that we would implement for these types of impacts are fairly standard. I don't think there's going to be any big surprises after we get into the NEPA process as to like, oh, we never saw this type of mitigation coming. And I think a concern that has been raised related to future development and the area is evolving, it's changing. So what if we get into the process and development is occurring? How do you assess those impacts early? And I think there are ways to anticipate not just what's on the ground today, but what is likely to be on the ground, in the next 10, 20 years. So we're looking ahead for the future development and determining what the impacts would be, based on that future kind of build out and not just what's on the ground today. And so that helps anticipate mitigation that would be needed even as conditions change too. So because once you are in the, I guess to kind of answer the point of what would you do, I mean, if something like that happened, I mean, once you're in the NEPA process, we would have to reevaluate kind of what the alternative would be and potentially kind of start the NEPA process over if it was a very different alignment. But I don't foresee something like that having to occur because of all the analysis and preliminary assessment that's been done today.
And even within the route alignment itself, I mean, like the green and the red are broad brushes,
Yes.
and they're not a specific alignment. So as we go through the process, from the preliminary alternatives to formal alternatives to preferred alternative and then NEPA, SEPA, now you're honing in on alignments that minimize those impacts to the greatest extent practicable, where you're trying to avoid, minimize, and then mitigate as kind of the last piece of it.
Yes, that's a really good point. The exact alignment is still in flux and would help assess what that mitigation would be as well.
So this is less, I guess, about alignment, more like just the look of it. Is it more or less going to match North 35th with all that kind of thing in terms of the look of it?
As far as like
The green alternative, I guess I'm specifically talking about.
the cross section, like the number of lanes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so some
Yes.
sidewalk,
Yep.
bike lane.
All of that
Okay.
will match.
It's
It'll be
more or less
consistent.
going to match. Okay, I'm just trying to
Correct.
visualize what are we thinking going through there. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Any other questions on the community feedback? No? Okay, next slide. So again, just to get into a little more detail, I want, I've obviously read all the points on the slide here, but there were perceived benefits and community concerns with either alternative. I mean, this is, it's not a situation where there's a clear sort of winner in an alternative. There's not one that has a lot more environmental impacts or would be, just significantly different than the other. There is a lot of, we heard a lot from people who live near the green alternative that, prefer the red, and vice versa. If you live near the red alternative, you kind of prefer the green. But there are nuanced differences in the two. And that's what we're trying to pull out as we go through this process. Or what are those, smaller but more significant kind of differences in the two alternatives. And so, again, we've already touched on some of these perceived benefits as far as the extension, the red alternative providing, a western kind of extension down to Pioneer, and that being, a perceived benefit for community connectivity in that part. Also, the red alternative would have a roundabout at Reman and Pioneer, and so that roundabout, improving an existing intersection that is problematic for the city, that is certainly something that would benefit, and that would benefit traffic conditions as well, more broadly. And then with the green alternative, though, there, is already some existing infrastructure that's in place. It's linking to that existing infrastructure, which is certainly a benefit and was called out. And then you could still have Bertzinger remain open for emergency and local access, so you still have kind of a couple of access points there as well with the green alternative, and it's a flatter terrain. You know, the red alternative does have some more geotechnical issues, would be a little more complex to build, and so that is a perceived benefit of the green alternative, as well as just the topographic nature of that. And then the community concerns, you know, for the red alternative, really it is about, you know, more significant environmental constraints in that area. Again, the steeper slopes, the additional geotechnical, which would then drive up the cost of that alternative as well. The alignment kind of deviates from what is perceived as the original vision for this area. I mean, it's called the South 35th Extension Project. There is an extension of that road right now, I think. So the red alternative, you know, is in a different location, and that's kind of a deviation from that. And then that it, you know, wouldn't adequately address the long-term traffic needs of the area as the sub-area more wholly develops. So the traffic analysis doesn't bear that out exactly, but that is a community concern too with that one. And then with the green alternative, existing Cedar Ridge neighborhood, safety risks that exist of, you know, for that neighborhood and additional through traffic for that existing neighborhood and potential speeds on that roadway. And again, with it's a flatter terrain, but also a straight alignment, which again, you know, could come with additional, you know, speed concerns and things like that. And then also impacts to the local wildlife and private property that exists too. As I mentioned before, there's more private property impacts with the green alternative than with the red alternative.
How many property owners would the green alternative impact? Do we know?
We do know that. It is on another slide, I believe.
I'll be happy to wait. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So with the noise specifically, and I'm not sure if that is all the property owners, so I might have to look at another note to look at that exactly. But any other questions? Okay, next slide. So the preliminary traffic analysis, we looked at study intersections outside of the sub-area to see how development of these two roadways, looking into the future, looking at in 2040, what would the development of either of these roadways do to traffic conditions in the surrounding area. And so a couple of key assumptions in the traffic analysis is, again, that the red alternative would rebuild a portion of Bertzinger Road, and it would include a roundabout at the intersection of Riemann, Bertzinger, Pioneer as well. And then the green alternative would restrict access to Bertzinger. Bertzinger would remain in place, but it would, as it is today, emergency and local access only for that.
Like no net improvements to Bertzinger as it is. It would just
Not
stay
with the
as
green
it
alternative.
is. Yeah.
It would stay as it is. Yeah. And so that roundabout doesn't exist in the green alternative in the traffic analysis. So all the study intersections would operate at acceptable level of service standards. So so no failing intersections except for Royal and Pioneer, which under all scenarios, so with the either alternative or in the no build condition, which is the condition where neither one of them are built, and under all of those scenarios, the Royal and Pioneer intersection has some failing level of service standards. So, and I think that's just based on, you know, projected growth in the area. The green alternative would sort of have minor to negligible operational changes overall to the other intersections. You're just not seeing much difference outside of the sub-area with the green alternative. With the red alternative, you would see pretty substantial improvements at Riemann and Pioneer. So that is the one location where there is a real difference in the two alternatives. Again, because you've got that roundabout intersection improvement occurring there. Next slide. With the proposed red alternative, again, you would see a projected reduction in crashes at the Reman and Pioneer intersection from 7 to 2. So some improvement there. And then you would also see within the sub-area itself, while none of the study intersections were within the sub-area, we did just look at traffic within the study area and how the roadway, the different alternatives could impact that existing circulation. And you would see some improvement in traffic conditions from those trips those eastbound trips that are currently taking 10th Way that would then divert and use the red alternative. But the green alternative would serve a larger portion of the G Creek Plateau and would better serve, the future potential development of that area as well. So as the traffic analysis said, really a combination, you get the best benefit from a traffic standpoint with kind of a combination of the red and green alternative. Again, there's not sort of a clear winner from a traffic analysis standpoint with either of them by themselves. They both help improve conditions in the area and have kind of minimal impacts outside with the exception of that one intersection. Yeah.
Maybe this is going to come up, and I think you referenced it, but I just don't want to assume that does reference it. If we were to take the green route, what would, I guess, the long-term status, you might say, of Bertzinger be? I mean, because I've driven it, and, it seems a little rough, and it's got some, critical areas and stuff like that. And so I guess that's a big question I have, is if we go with the green route, are we going to be talking about mandatory essential improvements to Bertzinger, in a relatively near future?
And just to piggyback on that, as you're getting ready to answer, thinking about that intersection at Ryman, which we know is not a great intersection for safety, would that roundabout be retained in a capital facilities plan long term? Would we eventually plan to put a roundabout there, even if we did the green alternative?
So those would be things that we would definitely need to look at and then add into the capital facilities plan and figure out what those mitigations would be to improve those circumstances. Okay.
Any other questions on traffic? Okay. Yeah.
So this isn't going to be like a brilliant question, but just reading that, my interpretation being, it feels like the green route has more effects on future building, and red has a little bit more effect on the here and now. Was that a correct interpretation, or?
I think the traffic analysis looks at the future condition kind of regardless, so for both. So what I was talking about was really the future condition. But I think that the red alternative probably, and our traffic engineer, he is here, if he, who did the traffic report, so feel free to jump in if I get this wrong. But I think the red alternative affects more of that traffic that you already see today. So you would still have that traffic in the future, as opposed to the green alternative really addressing that existing traffic today and that future traffic because of where it's located within the sub-area in a place where you don't have the existing development, but it is planned for the future. So does that? Yeah.
I think your question's spot on in that the growth in the area around red is very likely to be faster. It's in the city, zoned for that. And so there is a near-term benefit of red, assuming it's feasible. And the green serves a bigger area, like the slide says. So the net benefit for red is those trips wouldn't have to go through the community. And we heard that loud and clear, that, for people who want to walk on these roadways, those cars passing them is an issue.
Any other? Okay. Next slide. Okay. So looking at land use and parks, and so as John just mentioned, the red alternative is within the city. The green alternative has segments that are outside of the city. So the zoning and land use are different. It is anticipated that that area would be annexed, and there would be future development that would occur along the green alternative as well. You do see, again, more conversion, and this doesn't have the specific number, so I may have to get back to you on the specific number of properties. I know it's in our report, I just can't recall it off the top of my head. But there is less conversion of residential land to right-of-way with the red alternative than with the green alternative. And then there is some improvements to access to trails, but one thing Miranda and I were just talking about before this meeting, the brand new trail that is at Ridgefield Heights is not being fully shown on this map, so we need to show that because there would be some impacts to that trail. We thought we had gotten the location on here, and then it's not fully on there. So I think the new trail would intersect with the red alternative in maybe a couple of places, the way it kind of does switchbacks. And so we need to get that on here and update this analysis to show that there would be impacts to that trail. And so you would have to, do trail crossings and things like that in order to mitigate for that potential impact in the future as well. And the green alternative, there's no direct impact to a trail like that with the green alternative. So that would be something that is different between the two. Yeah.
So just looking at this map as, a regular person, is there a reason that we are not using that existing road that's below that we would improve on that road instead of creating an entire new path versus, just explain the reason for needing something new rather than utilizing the infrastructure that's already in place?
For the red alternative?
Yes, please.
I think, so others, the city chime in, but so some of that is Bertzinger, that is, you can't, physically to actually improve that would be incredibly challenging, more so than a new roadway alignment. So that's my understanding of a lot of the.
So that's part of it. The other part is the slope, is that if you use the existing Bertzinger, when they looked at it originally, one of the reasons the red alternative even exists is that when the initial analysis for the 35th Avenue extension was done, that west extension wasn't part of it. But when they started looking at the recreated slopes after Ridgefield Heights and how that had developed, the engineers started looking at it and saying, well, if you actually ride along the slope, going straight, and then you kind of start going northwest and you ride along the slope, you can come down at an area that is much lower than what it used to be in 2007 when they were looking at a flyover using the existing Bertzinger. And so you end up at a much lower point, and you can do a bridge crossing that is more of a culvert crossing as opposed to a flyover going over Pioneer. And so at that point, that's when they started looking at the red alternative and saying, well, actually, there may be a feasible alternative if you take that alignment and you start riding that slope down so that you're not going down a hill like this, but that you actually have a little less steep decline. So those are the two primary reasons.
Is it appropriate if I get up and point to the map?
No one will see it except for you guys, but.
Well, I'm here for you guys to answer questions, right? So.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we're online, and so no one online will know what you're pointing at,
well,
but go ahead.
I can describe it. My eyes don't work that well to see this far away, so I need to. Mike, I'm just curious. Instead of we're going here, instead of utilizing this and connecting it right there and then still doing that same slope situation, is that what you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that the engineer said that was not feasible to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm a visual learner.
Any other questions on this? Okay, next slide. Noise. So this is where we do have the number of potentially impacted properties from a noise perspective, but that's not the same number that would actually be required to take property for a right-of-way. So the two different numbers there. But The noise zone is shown on the map, so that's where the noise analysis looks at an area, I think 500 feet from the center line of the roadway, and assesses, how many noise receptors are within that area. And sensitive noise receptors are residential properties, trails, parks, things where you don't want noisy conditions to exist typically. And so the red alternative would impact approximately 30 residential properties. And we did, after the open house, we went back, previously that number was lower in our analysis, but we went back and looked at even the properties that are platted but not maybe developed yet, and we included those because the intention is that there would be properties on, residential properties on those lots in the relatively near future. And then for the green alternative, there would be 47 residential properties that would be potentially impacted from noise. And then both would increase noise levels for trail usage in the area. Is there a question?
Yeah, I did have a question.
Yeah.
The question I have is when you figured out the impacts to the properties potentially with residences on there, what density did you figure?
I think we looked at the individual lots that are already planned. So if there are additional ADUs that may be built on those lots or additional density beyond those individual lots, that I don't believe was incorporated.
32 units per acre or 16?
So most of this, and
I was just asking
yeah,
what
we didn't look at it from a density perspective because we didn't look at, it's not based on zoning, it's based on the actual residential properties that
As they exist.
exists today.
Yeah,
Correct.
exists today. So it's platted, it would be platted lots. So we looked at one individual platted lot within a subdivision.
Let's go back one screen. You see that big triangle or big rectangle in the middle? Mm-hmm. That's a lot of different ownerships in that one. There's the little piece up top with a little pencil between it, just above the dark blue on the right side.
Yep.
There's a little 5-6 acre piece with a narrow piece. But that big blue is not all one parcel. There's several parcels in there.
And that was taken into consideration, the
Okay.
individual parcel, because this is just the map that we had the trails and that's just showing the city limits on it. But if you go to the next slide, when we did the noise, now they're very hard to see on this map, but there are parcel lines on that aerial, and that's what we looked at. But just to the east of 35th, right adjacent to Pioneer, south of Pioneer, if that is a large property that may develop in the future, but that's only going to be, I don't think there's any residents on that property now. So that wouldn't have been considered a residential property to be impacted because there's no house that exists there today.
No house. We tried getting it for a park, but it didn't happen.
Well, it might be an interesting piece of the NEPA analysis that we can consider is the future development potential in the area and impacts to the future development that is in the area. Because as you indicate, along the green alignment, those big, huge properties that are parcelized but are still large, they do have zoning associated with them, and at least 2 of them are in for annexation right now, are asking to be considered to be annexed. So we can certainly look at like potential property impacts in that future, in kind of the future scope of it. Obviously, as they develop, there would be that kind of the alignment between this project and the development application, which also looks at impacts. So I don't know exactly how we would tackle it, but understanding your point.
The alignment may go through some of those properties that are in for annexation of this 35th.
Certainly that is possible.
It may not be the straight line, I mean, because like we said, it's just a line drawn in the sand now.
And this is actually exactly what I was referring to earlier when the question was asked about, could something in the NEPA process kind of throw a wrench in it? And just to what Steve said, I had this conversation with our noise analyst last week to discuss how we would do that, and his recommendation was exactly what Steve said. You know, we would assess those properties from a noise perspective as if they were developed, because that is the greatest potential impact, which is what you want to look at in a NEPA process, is what's the greatest potential impact. Even if the impact is less, that's great, but you want to look at the greatest impact, potential impact, so that you can assess mitigation relative to that. So, yeah. Any other questions on noise? So I guess the last point on noise I would make is that either alternative would, you know, likely require compliance with WSDOT and federal noise abatement criteria. So there might be, you know, noise walls and things that would exist for either alternative. Wetlands and waters. So there's a little bit more potential wetland mitigation that would be required with the red alternative versus the green alternative. Both have some impacts to wetlands. We didn't do a wetland delineation as part of this. That would come from the locally preferred alternative, but prior studies have identified category 2 and 3 wetlands near the red alternative, which typically require a 100-foot buffer under Ridgefield's code. And then, you know, with the green alternative, less delineation of wetland has existed there, so we're less sure about the actual category of potential wetlands, but there are potential wetlands in the vicinity of that alternative as well. And so, again, we would anticipate impacts and mitigation with either of these, slightly more with the red alternative. Next slide. Habitat, so along with, you know, wetlands and then just the environmental areas as well, seeing potential impacts to habitat conditions. So there's 2 priority bat species that are in the area that could be impacted by either alternative. There's some mature forest area in the green alternative, and then there's slightly more potential habitat impacts with the red alternative with the oak woodland mature forest area, and some potential impacts to steelhead and coho salmon, which is a threatened species because there is a floodway with the red alternative that would be impacted as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. So again, habitat, we didn't do field work and do an on-the-ground habitat assessment as part of this more desktop review, but that would be done as after the locally preferred alternative is selected. So this is the floodplain impacts. So there is a FEMA mapped floodway as part of the red alternative that would be impacted and would require consistency with floodplain permitting. And would likely require a larger culvert to cross that stream. And then there's kind of minimal flood and no mapped floodplains as part of the green alternative. Still some stream crossing and a single kind of culvert that would need to exist. Geotechnical conditions as well. So again, for this particular preliminary analysis, we looked at geotechnical reports that have been done in the area and assessed those. So they're largely you're finding a lot of the same things, kind of red to green, but there are additional steeper slopes that would likely require more retaining walls in the red alternative than with the green alternative. So that more perpendicular kind of approach to the steep slopes in the green alternative would allow for kind of a less risky build and kind of better stability than the red alternative is just a riskier construction and build condition. Next slide. Cultural resources. So again, in both situations here, largely the same from an archaeological resources standpoint, moderate to high probability just based on county mapping. And then there is potentially one eligible property in the red alternative that could be impacted. And then after a locally preferred alternative is selected, we'd have to go through, as part of NEPA, the Section 106 process and a more stringent review of cultural and historic properties, and record those with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation as well. And this is a big part of the NEPA process, is doing this assessment and kind of consultation. Utilities, there is a planned sewer pump station that is near the Ridgefield Heights area that would be potentially impacted by the red alternative. So that is planned. There's no known sewer conflicts with the green alternative. So I think we've been coordinating with Clark Regional through this process too, so they're aware of that, and we would continue to do that with either alternative and making sure those impacts are identified early and adjustments can be made. So now getting to the purpose and need. This is, again, as I mentioned, an important part of assessing the two alternatives in order to kind of meet the criteria for a locally preferred alternative from a NEPA standpoint. And really, broadly, both alternatives meet the purpose and need. There are some nuances to each of them, where the red alternative and the green alternative both would provide new roadways that could improve conditions and improve kind of the complete streets connectivity. There are some, benefits, as we talked about, from a traffic standpoint for the red alternative and that new roundabout that would help operations, which is part of the purpose and need. But the green alternative still maintains, safe and efficient operations overall. So generally, you're not seeing, reduction in level of service or anything with the green alternative. They would both really support kind of long-term growth. You are seeing more impacts to critical areas with the red alternative, which balancing the transportation improvements with environmental conditions is part of the purpose and need. So you're seeing a little more impact to those environmental areas with the red alternative. And then from a safety standpoint, the red alternative, again, was largely favored by people who live in the Cedar Ridge neighborhood, where the green alternative is directly adjacent. From a safety standpoint, that was what we heard. But then on kind of the flip side of that, the majority of community members overall that we heard from through this process have favored the green alternative. Any questions on that? There are a lot of similarities in this, and it really does require kind of digging into the nuance of the purpose and need to try and distinguish the differences in the two alternatives.
Questions at this point, Council? For me, looking at this, looking at the green alternative, I think the obvious impact is to the Cedar Ridge neighborhood right off the bat, and that's a really narrow road right now, and it butts right up, those houses butt right up against the road. What are we looking at? I know you talked about mitigation measures and whatnot, but I mean, what is the potential impacts, and how would that work? Because you want a straight line going through there. You don't want to have to dog leg the road to kind of get away from those houses, but it feels like that's a lot of higher speed traffic going right next to, within feet of people's living rooms.
Well, open to your thoughts as well. I mean, I think we haven't really looked at the specific mitigation yet. That would be part of the next process, but I think noise walls certainly are something that can be done. Speed and improvements to the roadway itself help with that as well.
One of the things you mentioned is how the pinch point and how narrow it is. It's because it's a half width. It's actually not a full road width. So part of the project is to take it to a full road width. So the property on the east side of 35th, that property, we have right of way that we would then access to complete the cross section, so that you would have a full road where you'd have curb, gutter, sidewalk, bike lanes on both. So that, as far as the narrowness there, but as far as mitigation and calming, I would leave that to Ms. Lang.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we could look at as part of the NEPA study itself too, and really look at the refinement of what that alignment could end up doing. Could we shift it slightly and slow things down just a little bit? That might be a benefit.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that goes back to my earlier question about how closely it would resemble North 35th. I mean, I don't live far from there. And, we have on the west side of it, a nice row with wood fence and, there's a buffer. I have not heard about noise complaints, but we also have calming through speed bumps and stuff like that. And so if it's kind of copy paste from North 35th, if we haven't gotten a lot of negative feedback about that, it, I don't know, minimizes my concern about this piece.
So to your point, Counselor, so it's a good thing to look at, and we can do that, is look at North 35th, kind of on the north side of Pioneer, because as it did develop out, there were lessons learned on that. It wasn't, we did not have the traffic calming measures in originally, and then when we did the completion of 35th, the last section of it, that's when the speed bumps were put in, the speed cushions were put in, knowing that it was flat, straight, and relatively wide. That definitely was one where we learned, all right, we need to, there's no visual narrowing. There used to be a tree, if you remember, on North 35th, kind of looked like it was in the middle of the street. Once that went away and it became a full width, then we addressed that with some traffic calming. So we could certainly look at some of the measures that were employed there.
So this is kind of a twofold question because we have the looming Pioneer Street slope stabilization project. So if we hypothetically go with red, would that slope stabilization project be lumped in with the work that is being done on Pioneer? Or if it goes to green, is that going to stay a standalone project that will just be done on its own?
So the current funds that we have for the slope stabilization is more of an interim fix. It's not the permanent repair. We will still need to seek additional funds for the permanent repair, and those costs are not included in this work at this point in time, nor is the scope.
This may be a very unusual question. What about winter conditions on the red alternative with the slope and the bend and things like that? Any concern about that?
So it would still be constructed, designed and constructed to meet current standards. Would the grades potentially be a problem? Maybe. I mean, we'd have to look into that a lot further to actually know what they would be as it all shook out. So I don't know that I could give you a defined answer right now, but definitely a consideration for us.
Thank you.
Right? Good sled hill.
Good place to go sledding.
You tell me all about it.
I think we may have the same potential problem on 35th. It all depends on what their crossing is made of. Whether you're at the bottom of the canyon and just a flat spot and back up the other side, or it could be fairly gradual, or it could be fairly steep down and up on 35th. So it depends on the design.
Are there two different culverts regarding the stream that we would encounter? And if so, which would be least expensive, red or green?
I think the red would require a larger, like a double culvert to cross the roadway. So it would be two different crossings. It would just be a double, it would be a larger crossing that would have to happen. Whereas the way the green alternative would cross at a more perpendicular, it could be a smaller culvert. So I think the red would be a more expensive crossing.
Thank you.
Do you have a slide on forecasted costs for this?
We do not. We did not do more preliminary cost analysis. That was done as part of the prior alternatives analysis for all of the alternatives, and the red was slightly, more than the green alternative. But we have not updated that cost because we haven't updated any additional engineering for this assessment. Okay. We have just two more slides, I think. This one really is just things we've been discussing throughout, but, for you all to consider in discussion and just questions to really, drive what what would be the best locally preferred alternative, which one really meets the purpose and need, the degree of environmental impacts for each alternative, which one's consistent with community priorities, and then the technical factors and the complications that could go into each alternative and cost considerations as well. So those are the things that, I think we would encourage you all to think about as you are, discussing and eventually coming to a decision on a locally preferred alternative.
Great.
And then the next steps are another meeting, a public hearing to actually select a locally preferred alternative. I think we'll work with staff to determine, when best to do that. And then from there, we would have additional coordination with FHWA and WashDOT to prepare what we call a class of action memo. So we are anticipating this would be an environmental assessment. It's kind of the middle road of a NEPA process, so it's not a categorical exemption or exclusion that would, for projects that are anticipated to have less impacts. It's also not an EIS, so that's what we anticipate this being, but we will get that confirmation from WashDOT and FHWA, and then we will initiate first the Endangered Species Act compliance and a biological opinion, because it takes a while to do the consultation with the federal agencies that are required there, and environmental assessment has to be done within a year. And so we would have to initiate that biological assessment process first, get that underway, and then once we're at a certain point in that, we would actually formally initiate NEPA and do NEPA scoping and kick off the environmental assessment process.
All right, I'm looking around at my colleagues. I don't think there's any other questions. It doesn't look like nobody's eager to grab the microphone. Okay, yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming today. This was very helpful. It was a good refresher because it's been a while since we touched this, but we'll look forward to that public hearing at some point in the future here.
Okay.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, with that, that will conclude our study session for today. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff, and our consultants. We appreciate you. And yeah, we'll see you all next week at a regular scheduled council meeting.